RCT management and data management within HIV RCTs. And I thought, who gets me really clean data kind of every single time I want to do an analysis? And I immediately, of course, thought of Sam and Laura. So it's my distinct honor to introduce our two speakers today. We have Sam Dilworth, who has over 20 years of data management and statistics experience. She's a data manager and senior statistician here in the Division of Prevention Science, and has done a lot of work as part of the Center for AIDS Prevention Studies at UCSF. Her expertise includes building complex data management collection systems for multiple studies, creating randomization schemes for R01s, cleaning and managing data across multiple projects, creating analysis-ready data sets, and also performing statistical analyses and contributing to publications. We also have with us Laura Coffin. Laura Coffin, MPH, is a public health professional with extensive experience leading NIH-funded HIV community intervention studies. She has contributed to research and program development across Santa Cruz, San Francisco, Ann Arbor, New York, and Seattle. Laura's experience encompasses all aspects of research coordination, including fiscal management, regulatory compliance, team supervision, data integrity, and daily operations. Committed to advancing public health, she is dedicated to initiatives that promote equitable access to care and prevention resources. And I will say that whenever someone says, I have a question about how to do X, Y, or Z in a project in the best possible way, I always say, contact Laura and ask her, because she's amazing. She's a rock star project coordinator. And so I feel very privileged and blessed to have both Sam and Laura with us today. I think it's going to be a really neat synergy between statistics, data management, and project coordination. And it's going to illustrate for us the really symbiotic relationship when you have an excellent statistician and excellent project coordinator working together in tandem to yield the best possible data, and then ultimately the best possible results from an HIV behavioral intervention trial. So without further ado, let's hear from Sam and Laura on rigor through redundancy, the old school method. And I believe, and Sam and Laura, correct me if I'm wrong about this, but I think you all would prefer to take questions at the end. And we do have a little extra time past the hour. If things wind up running a little long, they've graciously agreed to stay on for an additional 10 to 15 minutes. So for those of you who have burning questions, don't worry, your questions will get answered. Okay, all yours.
Hey, hi. Thank you everyone for attending Rigor Through Redundancy, the old school method. This is a slightly higher level talk for folks who are familiar with randomized controlled trials.
I'd like to begin by discussing the goals of quality assurance. Our results are only as reliable as the data we collect. The quality of data that we're striving for should be as accurate and valid as possible. We're aiming to record participant responses as they intended to respond. We're really looking for the truth. Data should be clean and error-free. It should be within appropriate bounds. We should be able to account for any missingness in the data. And data should be reproducible. We should be able to get the same results if we come back again with the same population. Data collection and management should be standardized. The goal of randomized controlled trials is to prove a treatment effect. And here, rigor is of utmost importance because errors lead to noise and washout effects. Some challenges were faced when dealing with human subjects in human subject research are that humans are not reliable all the time, and they make mistakes, both participants and staff members. They might respond a different way under the same stimuli. We are striving to offer the same identical experience to all participants, and that gets back to the goal of reproducibility. And we should be able to explain any missing data we have. If a participant refuses, or if the question is just missing, we need to know the difference, because if it's an accident, we're trying to avoid those. We can set those parameters in data collection software, but if a person is missing a visit or a biological milestone, why is it? Is it an accident, or is it because the participant timed out? We need to know those reasons.
Another challenge is follow-up rates, and we have found that if staff and participants have a good experience, it can really help with that. If participants are enjoying their experience, they will be more likely to complete follow-up milestones. Next slide. Okay, so I'm going to go first and talk about the tasks that I have as a project director. And I find that there's 5 main tasks to assure quality assurance. First, it's having standard operating procedures, or SOPs. Second is that all participant appointments are in a calendar that we all share. Each team also has an Excel spreadsheet that we call a pipeline. We have regular meetings, weekly meetings with the teams, and in those meetings, we discuss the pipeline and the calendar. And monthly meetings, Sam and I go over we do reconciliation. And also, the last thing that's really important is logs. Basically, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. SOPs, they are, you start planning them during study startup, and you can plan every situation that you can possibly think of, but participants always add new situations. And it's important to amend SOPs to include all of those one-off situations. They always come up, and it's important to write down exactly what you did so that you can recreate exactly what you did next time it comes up. Indicate changes to all SOPs by updating the file name with a date at the end. Don't overwrite the last version. Just put the old version in a folder that's called archive or old. And every single folder should have another folder in it called archive or old, where you can keep all of your older versions for historical knowledge. Write everything down with the date, including the year. When we have, a 5-year grant, there are 5 March 26th that come up. So it's really important to write down the year. And you can also never predict what information you're going to need during analysis. And consistency is the key to reliable data. I find statuses are incredibly important and really helpful. They help with the consort diagram. Statuses should be clearly defined. The statuses that I like to use are on hold, which is, someone wants to be rescreened in the future, or a rain check. Maybe they are out of town for a month. Screening, they're actively enrolled. And then I have a number of terminal statuses, which is the final status. And once they are in one of these, it doesn't change. So those are ineligible, declined, completed, withdrew before randomization, and this is participant initiated, withdrew after randomization, and that's also participant initiated. And it's important to remember that once someone's randomized, their data's in. Like, you use their data up to the point that they withdrew. Dropped from the study. And the distinction of that one is that it's study initiated. And there's a number of reasons people can be dropped. Maybe there was a misunderstanding with their inclusion criteria, or maybe their temperament is, not right for the study, anything at all. You just indicate that. Lost to follow-up. This one is always confusing to people. And I consider loss to follow-up to be a final milestone when people have timed out of the entire study and they've lost contact. We have lost contact with them. So if we know that they're in jail or in rehab or moved to Spain, that is not lost to follow-up. Lost to follow-up is really like you have no idea what happened and where they are. Deceased, and then always have a space for other. So this is a sample calendar. This calendar is from a year 3, so it's pretty busy. We had lots of people enrolled in the study, and I color code for different studies. One of my staff likes to say to me that the calendar is my love language, and I couldn't agree more with them. Next slide. So I have a formula for my calendar, and I'd like to give a shout out to Joey Taylor, who actually came up with this formula. So for all appointments, we put the participant ID, then the first 2 letters of the participant's last name, the first 2 letters of the participant's first name, the interviewer type, and the interviewer initials. And there's an example in light blue. All contacts and confirmation calls should go in the calendar notes. There's no need to put that in the database because it will just, it's not really information that's needed years down the road, how many confirmation calls you made. Never delete a calendar entry. Always create a new entry for rescheduled appointments. After an appointment occurred, I ask all my staff to add the results. So if it's yes, put a yes at the end. If it's canceled, put an X. And if it's rescheduled, put an R and then when it got rescheduled to. And I like to keep track of how many times things got rescheduled. Like you could put R2, R3. And then on a weekly, sometimes couple weekly basis, I go through and I look at every single calendar entry and I make sure that that is in the database. And when I've done the QA, I add a little star to the beginning of that and I circled it. I'm not going to go over all of these, but I just wanted to show you some of the calendar codes that we use. Any study will have their own calendar codes, but for example, EV is enrollment visit, F3 is 3-month follow-up, etc. Next slide. This is a sample of my pipeline. This is part of the redundancy. This is the data that is exactly in the database, but I like to have my own pipeline that's just a nice, clean snapshot of everything, all the people, all their dates, who missed what. So I have a tab for the enrolled people and I have another tab for completed. I color code a little bit. I put things in red if they're missing. I use a light blue if they took the survey outside of their window. I gray out a line if someone withdrew or was dropped. Yeah, I just find my pipeline incredibly helpful. And I have my own pipeline, and then the other teams have their own pipelines. Next slide. So I go through it daily or a few times a week. And when I'm comparing the calendar with the database, I'm also updating my pipeline. And at team meetings, we sit together with our pipelines and we just go line by line to compare what milestone participants have coming up or they just completed it. It's an opportunity to reconcile dates, typos, inconsistency, missing entries, anything. And we never take someone off the enrolled tab. until we both agree everything is completed. There's a completion letter got sent to participants, thanking them for their study and also giving them some referrals to other studies or any other services. And then we cut that line together and we put it into the completed tab. And I try to reiterate that it is expected and helpful to find discrepancies. This is exactly how we clean the data. I mean, we are clicking 100 different buttons and drop-down menus and adding dates and with all these numbers. And you know, as Sam said, we're all human and we make errors. And this is the time to find a lot of those little errors. Next. Tracking database. Sam is going to talk a lot more about that, but for me, the important part is I ask staff to add notes wherever they can. If something odd happens or a question comes up later, and this is sometimes years later, it helps put pieces of the story together. Things that could go in there are someone has challenges with tech, they like afternoon appointments, they need text reminders, they had a loss in their family, anything at all that would be helpful to communicate to other people who would be working with that participant, or anything that might affect the data that they have given. And I want to reiterate again, basically, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. There's no record of it. We don't have that data or any record of it. The logs that I like to use, first, we have a fix-it log, and this is organized by the data manager. It's a collaboration, though, of the entire team. And some examples of things that we put in there are data needs amending. Like, let's say a participant, you know, 10 minutes into a survey is like, oh, I forgot to tell you 10 minutes ago about this one extra appointment. Rather than hitting back, just make a note of it, and you can put that in the data log, fix-it log, and Sam can, after the fact, amend whatever is needed. An ID number gets mistaken or numbers get inverted. A participant took the survey twice, data was collected outside the window, anything at all. We just put it in the fix-it log. And that is our main communication form with our data manager. We have an adverse event and protocol violations log. This is extremely helpful for the IRB and DSMB reports. Some examples of things that we put in there is someone gets a bruise from phlebotomy, they've withdrawn and you put the reason, they consented, but they were ineligible, which is a protocol violation, and write down the story of what happened, unsuccessful blood draws. Someone was maybe paranoid about the intervention. For example, we currently have an app that they record videos of themselves taking daily medication, so contingency management. And 2 of our participants were paranoid that the app was spying on them and deleted it. And so that's examples of things to put in that log. Someone gets incarcerated or is in residential treatment. And it's better to have too much than not enough in there. Just if in doubt, put it in that log. I currently work on a multi-site study, and it's nice to have a log of site differences, even if they're minor. For example, one site emails the workbooks to participants and the other site mails them. It's just nice to have an ongoing record of all these little differences. And as a project director, I review the logs regularly, and if needed, I add information for clarity. Sometimes there's little words here and there to just make it clear so that in a year or two, when we're going back to reading it, we understand what happened.
Thanks, Laura. I'd like to start by going over my primary responsibilities as data manager. I've included a photo here of Star Trek's Data. as a reference for the correct pronunciation of the word. Data agrees with my assessment. If I'm lucky, I get to start at the beginning of a project and design the tracking database system and program the database and the surveys. And I say, if I'm lucky, because I get to control what comes in and then what we get out at the other end, if I get to start from the beginning. As the project progresses, I'm responsible for managing the data, downloading it, if possible, using API, which can automate the process. You just write some code and can press a button and automatically download. And I also would use code in post-processing software to add formats for response choices and labels for variable names, so we can keep track of what the data are, and prepare the data for comparisons in the QA process, which I'll show you here in a couple of slides. Afterwards, cleaning and editing the data, and then the end goal of having analysis-ready data sets that we can use for analysis for publication, ideally. Maintaining clean data requires being transparent, and by that I mean keeping good records from start to finish, and that gets back to the goal of reproducibility. And I'd like to highlight that it's necessary to keep clear communication with the project director and staff, because we are often, I think almost always, geographically separated. Data managers not in the field, and so we need to keep that communication open so that we can be on the same page with what's going on in the field. So the tracking database is a system, Laura briefly touched on it. It's used in the field by the study staff, but also we use the data contained in there for quality assurance on our side, on the data manager side. So we should have forms for all aspects of the study, and I'm putting forms in quotation here because that is REDCap terminology. You may use other software to create a tracking database, but I prefer REDCap, and I'll get to some reasons why, and so I'm going to use the same terminology there. All forms should have at least one date plus the year, as Laura highlighted. Multi-year studies have multi-year options. There should always be staff initials if there's a date for whoever is entering the data, what the date is, who did the data entry. REDCap does retain user information, but it's really nice to be able to export the staff initials, the date, for every field where there might be something different applied. REDCap does keep that information. It's a lot harder to get to than if you create a field yourself. There's also a nice little handy today button, so they don't have to think about what date it is. They can just press today. There should be completion information. REDCap does offer that as a dropdown. And there should always be at least one notes field. And that's so, as Laura was saying, people can keep notes for any interactions or any particular discrepancies or any issues. It's good to have a place for all of that. And it's all connected to the participant ID and to the form, to that survey milestone or biological milestone. REDCap and Qualtrics are available to UCSF users for free. In the old days, people used to use Access or FileMaker. Neither are free, and no one programs in them, as far as I know. So if you can get a hold of REDCap or Qualtrics and you're a UCSF user, it's free. This is a sample of what the REDCap tracking database looks like. I've populated this with fake data. You can see there's a subject ID. REDCap allows you to use a secondary identifier, which I've used last comma first here, and that's because the secondary identifier does have to be unique, so you can't just have a first name or a first name last initial. There might be multiple participants with that same combination, and REDCap won't let you use that. I add it here just so it's easier for the field team to see easily which participant they're dealing with, because they think of them on a name basis as well as their subject ID. Across the top, you can see events here that are separated by these vertical bars, the enrollment tracking database, for example, event. We have a baseline event, a randomization event, etc. for each of the milestones. Within the event, there are the forms. The forms are, if you click on a dot, it opens up a form for you, and they're also called instruments in REDCap. An example here, this is the biological data form, and this is the survey data form within the baseline here. I will talk about randomization a little bit more in a second, but I wanted to mention that this is an individual data tracking database, but if you had couples and you needed to randomize on the couple level, you could just have one row per couple, and you would, in the contact form, you would have information for both of your participants, both couple members. Forms that you need to have for the successful tracking database. The one you might most think of is the tracking form or the contact form. That contains a participant name and any contact information. I also would retain the date of birth if possible. It's a great secondary identifier. If you can use it in surveys, if you can include it in surveys, that's really handy. I have before had it be helpful untangling multiple surveys collected on the same day by a very busy interviewer, and the subject IDs they were worried maybe had been reversed, and we were able to untangle that with the date of birth, which was also collected in the survey. Contact information like email, phone, etc., addresses, and alternate contacts. And as Laura talked about earlier, the study status is really important to have for the consort diagram and for the field staff to know what's actually going on with the participants. Every time study status changes, there should be a date that's associated with that, so we can use that for the consort diagram, and there should be an interviewer initials field so that we have accountability for who made the change in case there are any questions. There should be multiple notes fields in the tracking form, and that is because you'll have multiple interactions with participants, and that is the central form for contacting them and dealing with them. Keeping that kind of information with a date for each one of those notes fields and an interviewer initials for each of those dates too, for accountability. I included a dates form. It's not necessary, but it was just in case it was useful for the staff to have a snapshot of dates that were target dates, where participants had actually attended the actual dates from their milestones. So it pulled all the information from the tracking database into one form that was a snapshot for the study staff to use. And there should be a form for the randomization in REDCap. This is one of the main reasons REDCap is such a lovely tracking database software package. It has randomization functionality, and that is not something that Qualtrics has as of right now. As far as I know, Access and FileMaker didn't either. It allows you to, if you get a statistician to create a randomization scheme for you, and whoever's programming your tracking database can upload that randomization table into REDCap, and the functionality hides randomization conditions for everyone but the one participant that you're randomizing at that time, so staff can't see the table. If you aren't using REDCap, or you aren't using that feature, you still would need to store the randomization condition somewhere in your tracking database, ideally, just for use for randomization procedures. The study staff needs to know, for example, if you were to use envelopes or some other randomization, you would still create a form that has your randomization condition. A sample tracking form here in REDCap. REDCap has a newish feature that allows you to build the form as a table. So fields can be in tabular form, which is a little bit more user-friendly than just stacking the fields the way it used to be. Just to show you an example, addresses are sort of more laid out the way you expect to see them, just to make it easier for staff to do data entry. Other forms you'll need are for the survey milestones, a field for the consent, a form for the consent form, baseline follow-ups, etc., any biospecimen milestones you should have forms for, and any other study activities that you need to keep track of. Some sample data forms here in REDCap, when I was talking about before, the biological at baseline form. We had dried blood spots in this study, and we sent out the kit to the participant. The participant created the dried blood spot and then sent it back to us, and then it needed to go and be sent to a freezer. And so there are different dates for each of these steps along the way. And then for the survey data, there's a separate form which has a link to the survey. You don't have to build it this way with a link within the tracking database, but you do want to keep your survey data separate from your tracking data in a separate project so that participant PHI contact information is not in the same exports as your survey data or your lab data. Those should live in different databases, ideally. The nice thing about REDCap and for a tracking database is you can see the dots, like I showed you here. They let you see the trajectory of the participants. Like you can see here that Oscar the Grouch only has a screener. The way we used incomplete and complete for the contact form is if the participant was still enrolled, this always remained red. And if they had left, if they had reached any of those terminal statuses, as Laura was talking about, they would have a green dot because it means that the form was complete. All of these other forms indicate complete forms, and the yellow indicates that it's unverified, which with the way our DBS worked, it was being shipped from us to the participant back to us, and then back to a freezer. And so there was a timeline that it would still be unverified until it reached the final end place. As I was talking about, you can create your own dates for use in exports. There is a calendar feature in REDCap. One can export things from it, but it isn't as user-friendly as creating your own dates in a form and being able to export all of those with interviewer IDs all in one place. And you can manipulate all of those for QA. Another thing that's really nice about REDCap is the reports are really customizable, and you can make reports in Qualtrics. I haven't found them as user-friendly, and reports are sometimes helpful for staff or the project director to amalgamate the tracking data so they can run their own reports. When it comes time to do the QA, I would download those dates from the tracking database. I want to know like completion dates for the baseline, completion dates for the lab, baseline labs, etc. And I can compare those, what the tracking database says, what the interviewers say that was conducted, and what we actually have. There should be parallel date in the baseline data that matches what's in the tracking database, and the lab data should have an associated lab date in the tracking database, etc. You can use any post-processing software or data management software you like. I like SAS. It has a nice procedure called proc compare that lets us create a report for review. Laura gave some examples of issues that we might find. We together review the discrepancies in real time, and I prefer real time to over email because we are able to avoid mistakes and confusion that might happen. There's also a lag with email. I send an email. There's a 3-hour time difference for where I'm located and where she's located. If we set a real-time meeting, we avoid that. It also builds rapport between the data person and the field team, which helps with communication. And we are able to discuss and arrive at solutions together. Ideally, I like to have just one central representative In my experience with Laura, that's the project director, one per site, so that she can then organize the field team's response, and it makes for a more streamlined meeting, not too many cooks in the kitchen. We together locate the source of the discrepancy and how we're going to edit those discrepancies, and we do this in an iterative and cumulative comparison fashion. So even though we may have cleaned all the data through last month, we need to run cumulative comparisons because it is possible to change data retroactively, either by accident or on purpose. And so we need to run those comparisons from the start of the study all the way to current time. In my experience, monthly works usually for most of my projects. So we have a standing meeting where we do these real-time comparisons. If you have less data coming in and monthly seems too frequent, you can do longer intervals between, but if you wait too long, you have to be careful that people don't forget what happened in a particular situation. And it may not have been written down, which it should be, as Laura said, but it's nice to have people's memories too. Oh, I remember that person. So keeping it not too far apart is ideal. What do you do when you have discrepancies? If the discrepancy or the error lies in the tracking database, that is sort of a living document that belongs to the field team. So I ask that the staff or the project director make the edits in the tracking database, and I'm responsible for making any edits to the data itself. And that way I'm not making edits in two different places. So then when we run iteratively comparisons, we can catch any other errors because I'm also human and may make errors. Anytime we make any changes to data, we record that issue and what was done in the fix-it log, as Laura was talking about. She gave some examples, erroneous subject ID or flop subject IDs, or participant recalling information later in the survey, rather than clicking all the way back. The interviewer can record it in the fix-it log. This is an example of what the fix-it log looks like. So a date that is reported, whoever's doing the reporting, the interview date is helpful sometimes to figure out which interview we're talking about, the participant ID, the explanation of the issue, which milestone or survey or biological time point we're talking about, and then importantly, what action was taken and who did it. Usually this final column is filled in by me because I'm the one responsible for changing the data. Changes to the tracking database, as it's sort of a living document, I don't think are necessary to record here in the fix-it log. Fix-it log is nice because it keeps all of our edits in one place. We don't have to look in emails to figure out what happened. We keep it on a server share, so we can make comments. I can make comments to the particular staff, and Laura can alert them to go looking for my comments, and the staff can reply back to me through the fix-it log. We contain reasons for any missing data that we have, so we know that the data aren't missing by accident. It can all be accounted for. And it also contains any information on idiosyncrasies. For example, Laura mentioned collecting data outside of the person's target window. I would keep that information in the fix-it log, but also create a flag variable that's yes, no, and a flag underscore S variable that's the please specify for the open text for that flag that would give more details. Redundancy in that it's in the fix-it log, but also in the data. When it comes to editing the data itself, I was calling it post-processing or data management software. I like SAS. There are others, whichever your preference, can be done in Python, etc., R, etc. You can also make edits directly into the data collection software package. REDCap lets you do it. Qualtrics lets you do it. Avoid doing it unless it's a simple change. In particular, avoid, and I would even go so far as to say never do it if you are deleting anything, because it is permanent. Those are permanent solutions. So you can delete records, you can delete variables, which will delete all that whole column of data, all the variables that were ever collected before. Even if you have a new question and it's slightly different and you have a newer variable, don't delete the other one. You can hide it in REDCap. Same goes for response choices. If you delete the response choice, all the prior data that you've collected, if someone had chosen that response, it will be deleted too. So don't delete if you can help it, or just don't do it. Once changes have been made to the data and the tracking database, we go back and we rerun the comparison. And we do find mistakes every month. So it may seem redundant, as we agree that it is, but it's that way for a reason. So we iterate until there are no discrepancies that remain. In conclusion, these redundancies and duplications are needed because we're conducting research with human subjects. Humans, participants and staff, and data managers, and all of us sometimes behave outside the box. This makes them hard to predict and hard to write programs to handle. And even if you could foresee issues, it would be costly to write complicated programming for unique situations.
It's also important to plan for staff turnover. That is just a reality. So putting systems in place where whoever comes in can kind of just pick up where the last person left off is incredibly helpful. And multiple hands are involved in every single step in data collection. And that's why using notes is so helpful.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. And thanks, Tor, for the introductions. And Maria and Stuart for getting all the technical stuff ready for us. And we welcome questions. If you have questions, you can put them in the Zoom chat, or you can raise your hand if they're specific to your project or just general about QA. Shoot.
Thank you both for a really wonderful presentation. This was fantastic and certainly met and exceeded all of my expectations when I initially invited you to do this. So very grateful. Maria will soon be launching an evaluation poll, and I'd like to ask the audience to please complete it, is that we utilize those data to justify continued funding for the center so we can continue offering excellent sessions like this one. So would anyone like to come on the line and pose a question to our speakers?
I had a question. First of all, thank you so much. This was super helpful and really great information. I had a question about like the tracking of changes. I know REDCap has that ability to kind of like require that you add a note whenever any change is made in the system. Do you recommend using that at all, or is that something that you use in your projects?
Are you talking about like the history?
It's like if somebody saves something and then goes back and makes a change later, there can be like a pop-up um, from REDCap that says why was the change made.
Yeah, I don't
Hmm.
personally, because I like to be able to export everything and work in post-processing software.
Yeah, that makes
I
sense.
think if that works in your workflow though, and you can't export the history individually. So for a particular field, you can export data that a user did, but all of the fields that they edited will be in this one box. And so you can export it to Excel, but then you have to go searching through the box to try and figure out what things were changed. So it's not as user-friendly in my opinion.
I see. Yeah, thank you for that.
I see we have a number of statistician data managers in the audience and also project coordinators. So if anyone would like to come on the line and, I mean, ask questions, certainly, but if you have ways of doing things or procedures that you do maybe a little differently, or you have comments you'd like to make based on your direct experience doing research trials, please do feel free to share.
Hi, Sam and Lara. This is Dipalika. Excellent session. Thank you so much for sharing how you do stuff. It's really
to see
nice
you.
to see how it's being done. And yeah, I have worked with Joey many, many years ago. So I can see where some of the tracking aspects are coming from. And yeah, that was great how she used to do it. I had a question specifically about this tracking database. So you said that you keep the actual survey data separate from the tracking data, right, Sam?
Yes.
So what does this, for instance, when you say baseline here or session 1, session 2, what do those forms have here in the tracking database?
Well, so I showed some samples. Do you want me to pull the slides down and open a REDCap, the actual REDCap
No,
data?
like if you could just click on, since you're in REDCap, any of the forms, like when you say baseline, is it just the date and things like that that's being recorded here?
Well, so this form, for example, has a bunch of different dates because this is the dried blood spot. So the dried blood spot, it was sent out if dried, there were 2 different types. I guess it was a different brand, but
Yeah.
this, when it was sent out to the participant and who sent it out to the, and this should be a baseline, and then where it was sent to, and when they receive it, there is a time and a date stamp. So that's one form, and then the baseline was just the survey. And so this actually whole model came sort of from something that Lance showed me that you had done a very long time ago with a link where you could carry forward to open it into a new project.
Yep.
So when you click this, it would open actually in my correct. I never changed these links, so this one I'm not going to click, but it would open up a survey, the baseline survey, and it would carry forward the subject ID and any of the other relevant information. You can carry forward things from the tracking form. You can only carry forward things from one form, but at least it should allow you to do more than that, but it doesn't. But so if I wanted to carry forward HIV status and I have that in my tracking form, I could do that with this link.
So the tracking database, basically here, it's just keeping track of, actually the date also isn't there. It's just whether
They do
baseline
have
was
a date.
completed.
They do have a date once they complete it. So when they complete it, they have to put in a date. And they also aren't, from this project, we're not allowed to open a part B until they had gone back to the tracking form, because I wanted PrEP status. PrEP was an eligibility requirement, and PrEP status was pulled into the tracking form. So if someone got through and they weren't on PrEP, they really shouldn't launch the part B. And there was a part A and a part B because part B was sent to participants. Part A was done over Zoom with an interviewer.
So the part A is actually interviewer administered survey.
Right. And so the interviewer would click on this for part B, which required PrEP status to be on the tracking form. And then a link would pop up once it was there, and they would copy and paste that into the Zoom chat, and then the participant would take the survey on their own. A second.
Oh, okay. And so those surveys are also in REDCap. It's just that the link is sent out separately.
Different project, right?
Yeah.
It opens a project. Yes, it's a separate project.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Yeah, it's nice to see how people can like bend REDCap to fit the study's needs, because otherwise it can be like pretty rigid in many ways. But it's nice to see how you've incorporated like multiple parts using links, and also this validation whether the PrEP information is there or not there. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, I also wanted to carry forward the part A information into part B, and that was the only way to do that. And because they were separate, we had interviewer administered, and then the participant was going to take the second part. That was the easiest way to do that.
So are part A and part B in the same RedCap project, or are they separate
Two
projects?
separate ones. You
So-
can't have different time points you can't have multiple rows if you're going to use the link per participant. It can only find one row per participant. There's only one identifier that you can use with
So
RedCap.
you said you're carrying over information from part A into part B?
Yes. So they would complete part A, and then they would go back to the tracking form, which I forgot now the terminology, the external module that is, what's the external module that carries forward? Cross-project piping. So it pulls from that other project into the tracking form, and then the tracking form I can see in the tracking database everything that's on that row. And so I could see, I think it was prep status that I really needed to see, which is why I didn't let them launch part B without prep status.
And then you're carrying over the same cross-project piping feature. I mean, using that feature to put in data from part A into part B before the
No,
participant
I
takes it
used
out?
the link. You can put information at the end of the link, and it's just a variable name.
Yeah.
Variable name equals and whatever the variable name is, and it will then you have the variable on the receiving project, which would be part B, and that filled in from the link. The link brings the information in. I'm
Okay.
happy to share that, what those look like with you.
Okay, thank you.
So I have a question about screening out potential like duplicate visitors. So one problem we have is that if it's been more than 30 days since someone completed the screening and they didn't do baseline, then they need to redo screening and they get a new PID. And the only information I have is their date of birth and initials. So when I've gone to a screener and said, hey, I noticed there's this birthday that shows up twice, more than 30 days apart. Is this the same person? Sometimes half the initials match, but there have been times where they say it is the same person, but the initials are totally different. So if you had your druthers, how would you set up a screening form to contain information where you could reliably identify a repeat visitor? Because also the screeners admitted, well, like, I don't remember what these people look like, so I can't confirm in certain cases.
So for us, I know Sam will have more information on this, but we have we have screening IDs and a screening database. And then once someone is consented, then they get like a study ID. And we find that helpful in catching those duplicates.
Thank you.
Sam?
Yeah, I mean, I think for this project, we had the brief screener, which was sort of a blast. Anyone could do it multiple times, and they had to give us contact information in that screener. So an email address, I think, was always entered. That's really good as an identifier. There were multiple forms of identification. We actually just went through some of the screening data because some people did get through. So there was a brief screener, and then there was a full screener where we contacted the participant and asked more detailed information, and gave them more detailed information before they actually signed a consent form or became enrolled. And that was a way to weed out. Since then, at the end of the study, we are finding there are still even some duplicates because there's multiple study staff along the way, and it's maybe not even the same person interacting with the people. But you can look at phone numbers, dates of birth. I mean, people change their names, and that first and last initial are often problematic. I've seen that before in other studies, so that's not surprising to me. But the likelihood that someone has the exact same date of birth, including year, is low, especially if there's any other identifier that's similar. Unless you're talking about students in 8th grade, then most of those children do have the same year. So that the likelihood of having the same date of birth is higher. But if you're talking about just the general population, the likelihood of them having the exact same date of birth is really small.
Yeah, just to clarify, the brief screener, that is what we sent out. We had a QR code and we had coasters at bars with our, like said, on prep and take this survey. People did it. Sometimes people took it like 10 times. We'd also have our flyers that way and dating apps. We just had tons of brief screeners, thousands and thousands and thousands of people took that. And so we didn't really collect that information. If they passed the brief screener, then one of our CRCs would contact them and do a more thorough screening and tell them about the study. And that we've just found really helpful.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask a question here. This illustrates really a wonderful collaboration between the two of you that you've clearly honed over time. And I'm just kind of curious from your points of view, what makes for a really successful project director, statistician, data manager collaboration? Like, what are your kind of maybe your top 3 do's and don'ts for project directors and data manager statisticians who are, looking to form a collaboration like this and be really successful?
That's a great question. I would say it's nice to have that rapport, and doing things in person, sort of, or not in person, in real time, helps build that rapport. But having responsibility for our parts, I think I can rely on Laura. She says she's going to do something and she does it. It's really great to have that to rely on. And so, being reliable on my side also. Yeah. I don't know, Laura, what do you think?
Yeah, I've never thought of that question, but I think doing things the same way is really helpful. I'd also agree that monthly scheduled Zoom meeting for our QA is very helpful so that we can communicate in real time and we can kind of get to know each other and also get to know our style. And then Sam had mentioned also that kind of having one point person on each study to be the data manager is really helpful so that there's just not too many cooks in the kitchen. So that, if Sam's like, hey, can you, go through and help me look at X, Y, and Z, there's a discrepancy, and there's a whole bunch of people who could possibly do it. How are you going to know who's going to do it? Like everyone thought the other person was going to do it. So it's really nice to just kind of have clear roles.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, definitely anyone who's still on, feel free to email me or reach out anytime if you have any questions, or I've also given people templates of my pipeline. It is my true north for keeping studies organized.
So your calendar is still an Outlook, right, Lara?
Yeah,
The one that you
yes.
showed?
Mhm.
It's
And
not the Google Calendar or anything.
No, it's in Outlook and it's shared with all the staff. Like we all
And
have
the
it.
staff don't have an issue logging into it from the, say, interviews. I mean, the interviews are actually done in the office, right, for the study, or is it like on site somewhere?
Well, we used to do it pre-COVID on site. Now we do it over Zoom.
Oh.
Although we do use Alliance Health Project, AHP. They have some offices if we do need to be in person.
So they don't really have any problems accessing the office Outlook from their, say, iPads or laptops, wherever they are?
Nope.
Okay. That's nice.
Any other questions for our all-star presenters today before we wrap up? All right. Well, Laura and Sam have generously shared their email addresses. So if any of you are like me and you click leave and then you immediately think of a question, you know where to find them. I want to thank you both, Laura and Sam, so much for doing this, really out of the kindness of your hearts. And we're incredibly grateful. This was a fantastic session today. And I want to thank everybody who came and the audience participation, I think was also terrific. Great questions. And so I also want to thank Marianne Stewart, who coordinated the organization and the recording. And hopefully we'll see this up on the CAPS YouTube channel soon so that folks who are doing something at 2 in the morning and want to know can go and find it. So thank you again, both, so much.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you.